Welcome back, everybody, to another session of Virtual Coaches Clinic. Layson Perkins here, and joining me this afternoon is Coach Logan Dummies. Logan has worked at the college level and has also coached in the G League. Excited to have him talk about some trends in basketball analytics. Really going to go through kind of some, kind of the basics and help us kind of understand what the numbers really mean. So, Logan, go ahead, turn it over to you right now, and let you take it away.
Alrighty, thanks, Layson. Welcome, everybody. I'm sure there are people still rolling in. I want to thank Layson and Lee for inviting me to be a part of this. This has been really cool. Obviously, we've all had some extra free time the last few days or weeks, and so this has just been excellent. I've learned a ton, tuned into a bunch of great speakers, and excited to share with you guys some stuff that I have today. So, Layson, I guess if there's anything technical wise that if you can't hear me or anything goes wrong, just let me know. But if not, I'm just going to go ahead and get rolling. As Layson said, I'm an assistant coach at VMI now. My background is I would say fairly normal. I came up through the ranks. I played Division III basketball. I played overseas for a couple of years. I was a GA at Texas A&M with Billy Kennedy. Spent some time in the Bay Area at Stanford and with the Warriors. And that was kind of where some of my interest in this stuff really took off. Over the last few years, I've been director of ops at Little Rock and now here at the Institute. Have just kind of pursued this area as something that is both a professional utility and just a general interest. And it's been really cool for me to kind of dive deeper into things as best we can. And I'm hoping to share some of that stuff with you guys here today. So the scope of my talk here, see if I can advance. I want to give you guys two things. The first is I want to help you guys understand the big picture. And the reason I think that is important is because I think that that's a really important step to being able to learn better in the future. So analytics is a big buzzword. There's a lot of components to it. And I think sometimes as we come across articles, we read stuff, we hear stuff, it's hard to know exactly where it fits. And so my hope is 1 hour from now that you guys have a really good understanding of just the big picture, and you kind of have a mental model into which you can put things kind of as you go from here. And then, of course, I want to leave you guys with a couple of specific metrics. So I know that we all kind of tune into these things for something practical. And so I want this to be more than a history lesson. I want you to have some practical stuff that you can take home. So my goal for myself here, if I can stay on time, I would love to spend about 25 minutes on that first part there, maybe about 15 minutes on the second part, and then leave some time for questions at the end. So I am going to kind of go fast, but hopefully we'll have some time to do some questions at the end. So let's see here. So first of all, what is analytics? Colton Houston, who spoke last week, he's got a really good pocket definition. He says that analytics is simply using information to make better decisions. So what I'm going to talk about is understanding analytics as a better way of answering questions so that you can make better decisions. But obviously the end goal is always to be action-oriented. So one way you can think about it is kind of like this. So if you take nothing else from this talk, I hope you'll remember this. The workflow or the process for implementing analytics into your program is far more important than any particular metric. If you don't get this part right here, there's nothing, there's no silver bullet that's going to help you in the long term. This is the most important thing right here, is understanding this process. What I often say to people is analytics is poorly used if you think of it as a solution in search of a problem. It is best used as figuring out how to solve a problem with a new solution. So analytics always starts with a question. And then in order to answer that question, we go to data. We mine new data. We crunch those numbers. That's the analytics part. And then we format it in a way that we can understand, because it doesn't help you if you can't understand it. And then we can take that information back to the decision makers, the question askers, and the cycle can repeat. So really important to keep this in mind, that data analytics info systems or data analytics format, that's kind of the workflow. but it has to start with the question asker. I think a lot of young coaches and assistants and support staff members get frustrated when they think, hey, I've got something here, but my coach doesn't believe in it, or my head coach doesn't understand it. And what I've been encouraged to think about is this: there are always things that your head coach wants to know. So instead of a bottoms-up approach, take a top-down approach. Start with what he wants to know, start with the question, and then go to the data and try to answer that question better. So another way we can think about it is like this: if we can better describe what happens, we can talk more predictably, actually isn't the right word. We can talk more probabilistically about what is likely to happen, and then we can do something about it. So it's always geared toward an action. And within a basketball program, there's 4 buckets, if you will, with which we can apply, or in which we can apply analytics. So we can apply it to prospects, right? Who do I draft? Who do I recruit? Who do I sign? We can apply it to our team, both on an individual level or on a team level. We can apply it to our opponent, both on a team level or an individual level. That's like scouting applications, right? And then lastly, strategy. We can take an analytical approach to strategy. We can analyze our strategy. Who should we sub? Who should we play? When should I call timeout? Who should we schedule? There's all kinds of applications that fit into that bucket. So I'm going to come back to that a little bit later on. But really what I want to do, the meat of this talk, is I want to talk through what I call 3 generations of analytics. So I'm going to talk about where we were, which was the box score generation. I'm going to talk about where we are, which I call APBR metrics. I'll explain that. And then where we're going, which is the player tracking generation. So I'm going to kind of unpack these one at a time, and then we'll get to some little take homes here. So, all right. So I'm going to throw some dates up. I'm going to try to move fast, and so we can get to the good stuff. But I want to talk about the box score generation first. So the first question that people started asking around the game of basketball was simply, how do we describe what happened in a game? Who did what during a game? And so to answer that question, we came up with the box score. So for almost 100 years, this was really the only descriptive data that we had about basketball. It took a long time to get to this, what we have today. So everybody, if you're a coach, you probably look at a box score before and after a game as much as anything, right? From the high school level all the way on up. It's still the most common source of data. Well, that's because for a long, long time, it's all that we had. And so I'm going to kind of talk through a couple of key eras or seasons of change in the game that led to the modern box score. So really for the first 50 years or so, not much data was really recorded. They were still working out a lot of the basics of the game. So I've highlighted in red here, these anything that's in red, that's the first time that something was recorded that we still track today. So, it took 25 years to make out of bounds a rule. I thought that was interesting. Players used to just fight for the ball in the seats, and then they said, hey, this is dangerous. Let's have out of bounds. So really for a long time, the game was modernizing and it didn't look much like it did today. But in the 40s, a couple of key things happened. So the first thing that happened was they figured out how to manufacture a ball that was actually round. And this was really important because dribble now a lot more easily. So changed the style of play. And then right around that same time, the NBA was founded. And so we started to track a bunch of things that had never been tracked before. We tracked rebounds, assists. We limited fouls to 5, introduced a shot clock, overtime periods instead of sudden death. So a lot of things that started to look more like the modern game. And then in the 1960s, there was another key kind of contribution to this trend toward the modern game, and that was the ABA. So the ABA actually came in an attempt to compete with the NBA. What the ABA did was they came up with some things that were thought of at the time as kind of gimmicky, but then actually ended up sticking in the 1970s when the ABA merged with the NBA. So that was things like tracking blocks, separating out offensive and defensive rebounds instead of just recording total rebounds. And then probably the biggest thing was the introduction of the three-point line. So by 1979, the NBA introduced the three-point line. And by the early 80s, we had this right here, which is more or less the same thing we have today to summarize what happened in a game. So if we had questions that could be answered analytically, this is where we had to turn. And the box score, it did a really good job of saying generally what happened, who did what. But it did a poor job of helping us ascertain anything more specific than that. So, for example, here you've got, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar had, I think it says eight made field goals. But we don't know anything else about him. We don't know if they were in the first quarter, the fourth quarter. We don't know if someone passed him the ball. We don't know who was guarding him. All kinds of things like that, right? So to answer some of these questions, the game started to move into this second generation. And this second generation wanted to answer more of the how and the when questions. And the way that we did that was through something called APBR metrics. And this is generally what people mean when they say advanced analytics. So APBR stands for the Association for Professional Basketball Research. And it was a group of people that kind of found each other and started to realize, hey, can we look beyond the box score to learn more about the game, to learn more about players, to learn more about games? And this generation had three unique components to it, if you will, three steps, I guess. The first was something called linear weights. The second was this concept of rate adjusting box score stats. We're going to talk a lot about that. And the third was the utilization of play-by-play data. So I'm going to kind of go into each of these as quickly as I can. And this is kind of where it gets meaty, because for most of us, this is where we're living right now. So people down, at more the high school level and below are still by and large in the kind of the box score era, if you will. The NBA has moved on to the player tracking era by and large. But for everybody in college, the vast majority of us, probably on this call, we're living in this generation right here. So this is kind of the stuff that we are utilizing or trying to figure out how to use in our day-to-day. So I'm going to go into each of these a little bit. Here's the timeline of kind of how that worked. Okay, so in 1959, coach at UNC, Frank McGuire, he wrote this awesome book called Defensive Basketball. And in this book, it was a 200-page book. He had one little excerpt, one section, like a page and a half, where he said, hey, maybe we should stop looking at the game on a per game basis, looking at stats on a per game basis, but we should start looking at them on a per possession basis. And that idea would kind of sit out there and nobody would do anything with it for a while until sabermetrics came along. So SABR stands for the Society of American Baseball Research. And it's, part of our lexicon. A lot of people understand generally what sabermetrics means, but it was a group of people that were trying to go deeper with baseball stats, right? So look at baseball stats more granularly and do some interesting things with them. So in 1977, this guy named Bill James, who was a night guard at a cannery, he started to play with baseball stats, and he started writing these little pamphlets called the Bill James Baseball Abstract. And a little while later, he published them, and they became super popular. And it kind of revolutionized this notion of more deeply kind of below the box score. So in 87, Dean Oliver, who is, most of you know that name probably, is basically the godfather of basketball analytics. He started to toy with this idea in his house. He was using a pen and paper, and he started to say, hey, can I record, play-by-play, basically, look at basketball on a possession level. So a few years later, this started to catch on in the NBA. The 76ers were the first team to start doing this. And then when the internet, came on the scene in the mid to late 90s, a lot of these people started finding each other, and it really exploded, leading to really two seminal works being published in the same year, John Hollinger's Pro Basketball Prospectus, and then Basketball on Paper, which is Dean Oliver's first book. And at this point, this notion of advanced analytics had fully entered the lexicon. So I'm going to explain and kind of unpack what some of those advanced metrics are, what I mean by some of those things. So let's look first on a player level. I'm going to go player level, and then I'm going to talk about the team level real quick. So the first thing that advanced analytics did was it tried this thing called linear weights. So the idea of linear weights were, and I'm not going to talk about these specific ones at all, but you can look them up. You're probably familiar with some of them, like PER there at the end. But basically, linear weights were an attempt to summarize a player's box score contribution into one number. So can we put some coefficients in front of these box score stats and end up with a kind of a catch-all number of value with which we can rank players or compare players, basically. So this was kind of cool. Some of these were super popular, some less so. Some still used today a little bit. But they had one major problem. That problem was the problem of efficiency. So linear weights have a tough time, linear weights have a tough time comparing an inefficient and an efficient player. So a less efficient high usage player versus a more efficient low usage player, right? So in an attempt to solve this problem, people started asking, well, what if we do some basic math to these box score stats, and let's adjust all these box score stats to per possession ratings instead of per game ratings. So this was the introduction of a lot of things that we still use today, like O rating, D rating, usage. These are efficiency metrics that are on a per possession level. So that was pretty good. That was a good step. But it was still constrained by what is in the box score. So you can't measure the value of a player who doesn't do things that show up in the box score, right? Because all you're using is box score stats. So to solve this problem, people turned to play-by-play. They said, well, if we have really good play-by-play data, we can know who's in the game, we can know how much time is on the clock, and we can start doing some cool stuff with plus minus. So again, I'm not going to go through all these one at a time, but plus minus iterated over 20 years or so, 15, 20 years, from what we know of as pure plus minus, which is simply what is your effect on the score when you're in the game? How does the score change when you're in the game? All the way through to some really, really complex regression-based plus minuses. Regularized adjusted plus minus was really big for a while. That tried to just basically sharpen this notion of capturing player value by looking at the effect of a player's participation on the score. And so they adjusted for a bunch of different things to try to make that number accurate. And it was pretty good. It was useful for a while. In fact, that last one there, box plus minus, I'm going to come back to that and talk about that a little bit more at the end. So if you see some of these terms, or if you think through some of this stuff, this is kind of the context of where they fit and how they've kind of iterated as we've tried to solve problems. So the last little window is how these metrics can be applied to teams. You've probably seen and are familiar with a lot of these concepts. Pace, obviously, team offensive and defensive rating, the 4 factors. A lot of shot type data is being used a lot more now in college. Win probability modeling is really big now because it helps you assess a strategy. If I can look at the effect of certain strategic moves on the win probability model, it can tell me whether that was a good move or not. So, like, for example, should I foul up 3 with X amount of seconds left, and what does that do to my win probability? So if you see some of these things, these are just those second generation rate adjusted attempts to analyze team identity better, essentially. But the problem with all this stuff is there's still a lot missing, because in essence, you're still limited by the box score and you're limited by the play-by-play. Anything that's not contained there, you can't measure. So that leads us to the third generation, which is where the NBA has been for over a decade now. College isn't there yet. But the player tracking generation tried to basically say, how can we measure things that the human eye can't detect? So to talk about this phase, I'm going to talk through 4 companies that are doing some unique things to kind of move this utility, player tracking utility forward and kind of bring it to the down market, if you will. So I'm going to talk about Sport View, Second Spectrum, Boost, and Catapult Vision. I'm going to try to go through this in about 5 minutes here. So Sport View, I'm not sure who in the audience is familiar with Sport View, probably most of you, but Sport View is a company that came along around 2005, and they said, they basically took this Israeli missile tracking technology and they pointed it at a soccer field. And they said, hey, if we can track missiles, we can track people, right? So we can know where people are moving around on a soccer field. And it wasn't long before they realized you could do the same thing with basketball, and that by doing this, you could measure a bunch of stuff that a human can't. So you could quantify spacing, you could measure dribbles and passes and all kinds of stuff like that you just can't chart by hand very well. And so what they did was they used these motion tracking cameras, and they captured X, Y, and Z coordinates for all 10 players and the ball 25 times a second for the entire game. So really cool technology with a lot of applications, but it had a problem. And the problem was that it didn't speak the language of basketball. So all of these coordinates was a lot of unwieldy data, and it was very tough to understand what to do with it. So a company called Second Spectrum came along, and what they tried to do is they said, how can we use this information for storytelling? So what they wanted to do was say, let's put some powerful technology on the back end and train the computer to recognize patterns, and then we can talk about basketball more granularly. So they said, if we can recognize, for example, what a shot is, and we can recognize that the data point that is near the shooter is a defender, then we have now identified a contested shot. So here are a few things that and there's like 400 different things that they can measure, but here are just some examples of some new metrics that this technology has introduced. And by the way, Second Spectrum is, they're going to be around for a while. They've got a really good horizon. They're doing a lot more than this too. But you can see here that this is a new frontier. So imagine something like quantified shooter impact. You can now measure, hey, we can talk about a player who takes less contested shots and makes more of them, and compare that to a player who takes more contested shots and makes less of them, and weigh who's a better shooter and what changes need to be made and things like that. So really useful. The ball screen coverage stuff, the rim protection stuff especially, is really, really cool what they can do. But it was cost prohibitive, right? So even with a huge subsidy from the NBA, very expensive, even for an NBA team, this technology and the camera systems and all that stuff. So it's not really available for people that don't have a lot of money. So there are a few people trying to solve that problem. And one of the kind of industry leaders right now is a company called Boost. So what Boost wants to say, or the question they want to answer is, how do we do this player tracking without any special hardware? And so what they've done is they've come up with something called modern computer vision and deep learning. And they are using 2D video, which everybody has basically. They're saying, how can we teach the computer to pull some of these insights off of video? Now, to do this at large scale takes a lot of time and computing power. But what they figured out is that if you use a play-by-play and you use the play-by-play simultaneously with the video, you can essentially give the computer a shortcut and tell it where to look. And so if you know when an event happens, all the computer has to do is kind of look at a few keys around that event, and you can come up with some pretty cool insights. So you can know things like rebound location, or you can come up with passing charts where the ball moves throughout a possession, where the ball has been before a shot. So you could track things like potential assists or hockey assists. So this is a little bit more practical way of trying to do the same thing for less money. And it's probably, the technology is pretty close now from what I know, and it's got a good horizon too. So the only limitation really is that, again, it can only measure what can be seen. So how do we measure even more than this? Well, a company trying to solve that problem is Catapult. So Catapult, and they've partnered with a company called Vision. What they want to do is they want to measure the unseen. So they want to measure things like player load, player fatigue, biometric information like jumps and cuts and things like that. And so what they do to solve that problem is through these wearable positioning pucks. So they figured out that with a puck in your jersey that has a gyroscope, an accelerometer, and heart rate monitor in it, that they can capture broad biometric data that speaks a sport-specific language, and then they can actually use timestamps to eventually integrate that data into the video. So this isn't quite here yet, but it's basically the goal. So the end goal would be to have not only some of these player tracking insights pulled off a video, but also have some biometric information embedded in the video as well too. So that was 28 minutes, not bad. I'm gonna kind of segue here. We talked about the box score generation. We talked about three kind of key things that brought us into the modern era, that got us the modern box score. We talked about the second generation of APBR metrics or advanced analytics. We talked about how linear weights, possession level analysis, and play-by-play data have really revolutionized the way that we deal with analytics now. And this is where most of us is right here. And then kind of peeking into what is behind the curtain. The motion tracking, player tracking stuff, using pattern recognition technology, and eventually incorporating biometric integration. So, not bad, 28 minutes. Layson, you good if I keep going?
Yes, go right ahead.
Okay, awesome. What I want to do now is I want to talk about three specific metrics, and my goal is to give enough time for questions at the end. But I want to revisit those buckets that we talked about. So we talked about team, opponent, strategy, and prospects. For the purpose of brevity, I'm gonna combine the team and the opponent's bucket, and I'm gonna take a question then answer approach to how we might look into a question that pertains to each of these categories. So the three mock questions that I'm going to answer here are a team question. Tell me about our shot selection. Is it good? Is it bad as a team? The next one is tell me about how we score. What do we need to change strategically to score more? And then the last question is a really good one. Who should I recruit? We all want to answer that question. So I'm going to dive into three examples of metrics that you could use to answer these three questions. And again, my hope is that this will be not you. I was careful about my wording. These are things like anything that really should be put in your pocket with the hopes that it can stimulate some thinking and that maybe it gives you a new way of looking at something so that when the right question is asked, you have a better way of coming up with a better answer. Again, there's nothing that is a copy and paste. There's no copy and paste solution where you can just come up with something and say, now we're going to win a national championship. So my hope with these is that they stimulate some thoughts. All right, so shot selection. How good is our team's shot selection? If you're answering this question, here's a metric that might help you answer that question. So I'm going to start with a question for you. If I told you that I was able to make 10% of my full court shots, 94-foot heaves, and then I asked you, am I a good shooter? What would you say? Well, 1 out of 10 full court shots is really hard to do. So on one hand, yeah, I'm a pretty good shooter. But on the other hand, if I shot 10% for a game or career, that's terrible, right? So that's awful. So we all understand intuitively that there are actually two parts to shooting. There's taking the right shot or selecting the right shot, and then there's being able to make that shot. And so there's actually a pretty easy metric that you can use to ask yourself, is my team a good shot taking team or a good shot making team or both? Hopefully it's both. Meaning, are we taking great high percentage shots and shooting an average percentage of those shots? Or are we taking tough shots, but we're actually pretty good shooting teams, so we're bailing ourselves out? And what do we need to change? Do we need to emphasize being better shot makers, or do we need to emphasize shot selection more? So the way that you can do that is, if you can get a shot chart. This is a shot chart data from our team at VMI last year. You can pretty easily answer this question. So at the college level, shot chart data is out there. You can find it on Synergy. You can find broad shot chart data from other sources. But even if you're not able to have someone do it for you, you can pretty easily do it for yourself, right? You can do it game by game. If you do your opponent's stuff, it'll make this even easier. So all you have to do to answer your shot selection question is run this little formula right here. Take the zones or the areas that you want to measure. You could do layups, 2s and 3s. You could do different ranges of 2-pointers, or for the sake of this, I use this shot chart, which is 16 zones to it. But all you're going to do is you're going to take the percentage of your team shots at that zone minus the percentage of the league average, or you could do your opponent average, depending on what data you have available, of their average at that zone. So what's the difference? Then all you have to do is multiply that by the league, or, again, whatever data you have. If you have you and your opponents, if you have all Division I, if you have your league, I would advise using as much as you can. Multiply that by the shot value by 100, and then sum all of those areas, right? So you'll have a really low value for each. If you're doing 16 areas, you'll have a low value. But when you sum them, you should have a number somewhere between roughly -10 and +10, right? And what that's telling you is, that's saying that at an average accuracy, our shot selection is giving us an added X amount of points per 100 shots. Or it could be negative. It's negative, -10 points per 100 shots. Then you can run the same thing, but you can do it the opposite way. You can do it for accuracy. So you run the same math, but you flip it around and you say, all right, if we were to hypothetically take the average distribution of shots, would our accuracy put us above or below average output for those 100 shots? So what you want, obviously, is you want to be positive in both. If you have a low single or a high single-digit positive number in both, you're a really good team. So for example, we found preliminarily this year we were a good shot making team. We didn't take as many layups as average. We didn't get to the rim as much as average. So that kind of affected our shot selection number there. But a really easy thing to do. You can come up with this data on your own by hand. It doesn't take a lot of manpower or time, and it'll give you a pretty good proxy for what your team's shot selection is like compared to average. All right, 6 minutes. I'm gonna try to go through the last two. I know I've got some questions. How do we score? All right. I'm gonna answer this question of how, what should we change to try to score more would be a better way of putting it. And I'm going to answer that question by talking about a metric called shot volume. So I'll throw all this up there here. Shot volume is simply put, it is a measurement of on average, how many shots your team generates per 100 possessions, field goal attempts. Usually a number around 95 is about average, below 90 is bad, above 100 is good, is really good. And this is free throw adjusted for free throws, by the way. So all it's looking at is, if you look in that formula, it's looking at your team turnover rate, average field goal percentage, which helps you figure out how many offensive rebound opportunities you'll have. And then you multiply in your team's offensive rebounding rate, and then you add that back to the first number of non-turnover possessions. And that's about, again, it's not exact, but that's a good estimate of how many shots your team generates per 100 possessions. And the reason this is important, obviously, is because if two teams shoot the same effective field goal percentage, or I guess true shooting percentage if you were to count free throws. The team that takes more shots is going to win, right? So Bo Ryan is pretty famous, and Brad Stevens did this a lot too, like 10 years ago. They were way ahead of the curve on this, but basically figuring out that that combination stat of offensive rebound percentage and a low turnover rate really helps your shot volume number go up. So how would this help you answer that question? Well, it would say, hey, if we're a pretty good shooting team, then we really need to focus on getting more shots. But if we are, or the opposite, right? So what is more important for us in our offensive efficiency? Which of those two factors can we move up more? Can we shoot the same percentage and take more shots? Is that something that we can double down on? Or do we need to become a better shooting team? Do we, we're taking a lot of shots. We got to make more shots. So we got to focus on that. We got to focus on accuracy. Incidentally, I'm not going to talk about this, but for those of you that grab this PowerPoint later, I'll make it available. Another thing you could do is you could look at your true shooting percentage, your true shooting attempts compared to your opponent. And then you could just run an ANOVA in Excel and look at the effect on your net efficiency margin per game. And basically that the strength of the correlation will tell you which is more important for your team to winning, essentially. So it's not kind of an interesting thing you could do like mid-season or something, but I'm going to have to kind of gloss over that. So, all right, last thing, who should I recruit? Who should I recruit? This one is pretty hot off the press here. This is called Box Plus Minus 2.0. I touched on Box Plus Minus earlier. If you remember, it was in the column of the play-by-play derived insights, the plus minus stuff. But Box Plus Minus is actually a linear weight. It's a linear weight equation. So it just takes box score stats, and it has been really craftily designed by people way smarter than me who have figured out how to set the parameters to try to compare players as accurately as possible. So it adjusts for some things like position, for example, or role, the type of player that you are, to try to make sure that you're not comparing apples and oranges, but you're comparing apples and apples. So you need three things to run Box Plus Minus, and you can run this. You can run this on prospects. You can run this on your team. This picture I have here, this is our team from this year. I changed the player names and blacked out the minutes, so you don't know who's who. But it's pretty easy to run if you have three categories of data. You have to have box scores. You have to have accurate box scores. You have to have team efficiency averages. So this is your team efficiency, essentially. You have to have that for your prospect's team, and then you have to have that for some pool of his competition. So it could be a grassroots tournament. It could be several grassroots tournaments. It could be just the opponents that he's played against, or she. The more you can get, the better. I understand that getting data is a real roadblock for people, so I'm not going to get too hung up on that. But these averages can be pretty easily calculated just with box score. So I put that little formula up there. You can get possessions and approximate for possessions by running points divided by field goal attempts minus offensive rebounds plus turnovers plus half your free throws. That'll give you a proxy for efficiency. That's points per possession. And then if you have that on your prospect and his team, it helps you run this BPM formula to adjust for things like strength of team and strength of opponent. And then the last thing you need is just their position. So you input that again, and then the formula kind of runs it to adjust for play type, essentially. So the formula, the information, all this stuff, like anything else that I've talked about, is very easily Googleable. It's out there, and you can pull it up yourself and kind of look more into the nitty gritty. But what this will do is it'll help you. It's particularly effective at helping you compare two players that play in the same league or against similar competition. Now, obviously, comparing prospects that play in different states or different levels of high school competition is going to require your own intuition to kind of weigh what you know about their level of competition versus the other. So there's certainly limitations to this. And I can go into more of those specifics if you have questions. But again, all this stuff, all three of these metrics or these concepts, whatever you want to call them, you can learn about this stuff really easily, go deeper in it on your own. It's all online for free. It's all out there. So it is not bad. I got 8 minutes here. I'm going to leave this up and I'll take some questions for as much time as we have. This is my cell phone number and my work email. For anybody out there that has follow-ups, please just reach out to me directly. I love talking about this stuff. So I know I went fast. I can go through anything more slowly or specifically later. So Layson, how do we do? What do we got?
Okay, got a couple of questions here. The first one is, what's your take on the 4 factors and using them to guide your approach to the season?
I'm huge on the 4 factors. Let me rephrase that. The math is huge on the 4 factors. The 4 factors are called the 4 factors because they're shown to correlate most strong. They are the stats that correlate most strongly with net efficiency margin. So winning, basically. And there's actually, I've got it on a book in a book downstairs. There's actually certain ones of the 4 factors correlate more strongly than others, and it kind of they're not all equally. The correlation is not equally strong for all 4. So that's actually kind of interesting. I can't remember off the top of my head the order, so I'm not going to stab at it. But if you think about, if you can think back to like high school. When you learn the formula distance equals rate times time, right? A basketball game is basically trying to go the furthest distance that you can with time being the same for you and your opponent. So that's why the 4 factors matter, because they are the components of rate, essentially. Let me see if I can go off the top of my head. Shots, let's see, points per shot times shots per possession times possessions per minute. The 4 factors are the things that make up those 3 things. The higher you get those things, the higher your rate, or sorry, the higher your output, and the further your distance, so to speak.
Okay, next question is, what were the shot selection and shot making equations again?
Yeah, we can post this stuff, right?
Sure can.
Yeah, so you can go ahead and screenshot this. I can leave it up, but that is a sum of, and again, zone is just what I'm calling each of those areas, but you can bifurcate your shot chart however you want or however it comes to you. This is just like the most granular one that I could find for us.
Next question, thoughts on the values point system in evaluating players on the same team or in the same league?
I think what I've run into with that is that any sort of linear weights metric to evaluate your roster tends to tell you what you already know. In fact, probably the best application for some of that stuff is just like showing it to disillusioned players and parents when the time is right. So a little harder to like find unique value in.
Okay, next question was, if I know the number of average possessions I have each game, and I know the average field goal attempts, can't I find shot volume by just dividing those numbers?
Field goal attempts per possession. You need to know you need to know how many offensive rebound opportunities there were. Because I think there's certainly the question is, how specific do you want your answer to be? So even the one that I gave is not very specific. In other words, like over any given 100 possessions, it could be off. I'm sure there's more that you could do to make this even a little more airtight, but for the purposes of like our scope, it's still useful. But that's a good question. I would encourage you to like look into that more. Like how could you hone this to be even more specific? Because there's all kinds of fringe cases, right? There's offensive rebounds where the turnover follows the offensive rebound. The turnover doesn't precede the shot. So that this formula assumes that the turnover precedes the shot.
Okay. Next question was, how much of this data created actionable insights for VMI this season?
As much as possible. It's a good question. The I like to think that we're about as innovative as anybody. We're extremely data oriented. I think that unfortunately for any analytics minded person, there tends to be a lot of work that you do that doesn't bring you any return right away. So sometimes like you have to kind of play around with something and work on a metric for a while before you ever end up needing it or using it. And sometimes you never really use it. It helps you think about something differently, but it doesn't always help you answer a question. So that's kind of how I started the talk. But I always think of analytics as how can we best answer this question that really matters to us. So I would say that we used analytics to help us answer the questions that mattered to us. But there's all kinds of stuff that we didn't do, either because we didn't know, or we didn't care, or it didn't matter. Our specific situation is not the same as everybody else's. So that's what I really hope that everyone takes home is just that notion that the workflow always starts with a question. It starts with a decision maker, and then the data is only going to tell you what it tells you. So if you're interpreting it wrong, or if you're presenting it wrong, it's going to be limited. But your goal is to say, how can I make this as clean as possible? How can I come up with something that's additive and that's reliable, and then feed that back into my thought process, into my question.
Logan, thank you so much for being a part of this today. If you could post your contact information so that folks could follow up with you.
Yeah, absolutely. Please do. I love talking to people. Just hit me up and we'll shoot the bull. We'll talk about some of this stuff. That again, text me with anything small, email me with anything long, and I'd love to talk and I'd love to connect. So please reach out. The guys on this screen are super brilliant too. If you ever get a chance to meet or talk to any of them, please do that.
Absolutely. And coaches, thank you again for joining us today on this session. I'm going to go ahead and end the session here so we can get ready for our session coming up at 4 o'clock Eastern time.
Thanks, guys. Thanks, Layson.
Thank you, Logan.